Greetings, Mason Storm here. On today's episode we're going to look at making some ramen noodles and some ramen soup stock, and so we can have a full dish of ramen. To begin with, we're going to make our stock. This is the day before. I have some onion, garlic, a turkey carcass, some carrots, and celery. But the main ingredient that I'm missing here is some ginger. I didn't have any fresh ginger, frozen ginger, ginger powder, or ginger ale, so I had to add that in at a later point in time. So to begin with, we got ourselves a nice big pot filled with water, and we're going to crank the heat on it, and we're going to wait till it boils. We're going to begin by poaching our animal carcass. So once it's boiling, like you see here, we're just going to throw our carcass in, and we're going to let this cook for about a minute or so. And then after a minute goes by, we're going to pull it out, dump our water out, and then we can start making our stock. Now, I did have a little trouble extracting my meat with using the strainer in method. I couldn't find any tongs, so 2 wooden spoons to the rescue, and the carcass was safely removed, allowing me to dump the contents of the large vessel into the sink to remove the water. And we're going to fill it up with cold water. You always want to make your stock with cold water. So I'm just going to add my meat in here, and then I'm going to begin filling it with my water. Normally, I guess you could fill it under the sink with cold water, but this pot's quite large and doesn't really fit in the sink very well in my current locale. And I just turned down my heat a little bit so it wasn't super aggressive, and now we're just going to fill this thing up, and we're going to make several liters worth of stock. So now that we have lots of water inside the large vessel, we can add in our vegetables. So I'm just going to break up the celery and toss in the carrots. And then I'm going to use a knife just to make my onions a little bit smaller. And then follow that up with my garlic. Now if you were lucky enough to have ginger, this would be, well, I guess you could add it in right now. Sometimes when you're making stock you add your ginger a little bit later, but you can probably add it in now if you wanted to. The only reason why I bring that up is that a lot of the time when you're making stock, you want to season it later on, because you really don't know how it's going to taste till it starts to cook down. And it's easier to season it once you can kind of know what it's going to taste like, instead of doing everything all off the get-go. So we're just going to let this cook, and every now and then when it's cooking, you're going to have a filmy layer like this, just a bunch of stuff. Not entirely sure what causes it. But you can just take your spoon and skim off the top layer and just take off some of this kind of scummy stuff on the top of your stock. If you don't do anything with it, it's not really the end of the world, but I've heard it makes the stock taste better by skimming it off, and so that's what I'm going to do here. My scum on the top here isn't that bad, but sometimes it can be pretty bad, so depending on what you have on in your stock will really change how that's going to be. And when it comes to making stock, take your time. You can make it fast in 3 or 4 hours if you really wanted to, but your best bet's to probably cook it for 12-24 hours and just long cook it. You want it maybe simmering, maybe a little less than simmering, and you just let it cook down. And you can see by the marks on the side of my vessel here how much water is kind of evaporated out. I'm just adding in a pile of salt here just to kind of season it a little bit. I like doing my seasoning right at the end. This is in the morning, the following day. So I had it cooking all night. And so I can kind of mix it up, kind of give it a little bit of a taste. I always find that you need at least a little bit of salt in it, or else your stock never quite tastes right. And once you're satisfied with its seasoning level, you can take it off of the heat, and it's time to drain it and strain it. So I'm just going to be using 2 smaller pots here, and I'm just going to throw the old sieve in and then proceed to dump the stock into the pot. Super easy. Then it's best to let it cool before sticking it in the fridge or freezing it or whatever you're gonna do, but I'm gonna put it in the fridge, so gonna let it cool off, stick it in the fridge, and then we'll take up ramen making tonight or today, or from my editing position, yesterday. which is still today. Okay, let's shift gears now and start making our ramen noodles. So I have 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 2 eggs, and 150 grams of flour. You might want to use about 200. So on my first batch, I kind of forgot something a little bit crucial. When it comes to making ramen noodles, you don't want to use regular baking soda. You want to actually use like baked baking soda. So you cook it in the oven before you use it. And that gives you a higher alkalinity, which makes the noodles more stretchy. So we're going to actually do that quick. So on this tray here, I just put some foil down and a pile of baking soda. Throw it in the oven, 250 degrees. We're just going to let that cook for an hour or so. When it comes out, we actually have a lot less of it left. I forget how it is, but I think it's sodium bicarbonate becomes sodium carbonate, which does a different alkalinity value. So it works great for making ramen noodles. I think traditionally they use like lye water or something like that, but this is pretty easy to do. Okay, now that we're done with that and we have our fancy baking soda, we can get our ingredients back out and we can try making this stuff a second time, because the second time will be better than the first time. And I did increase the amount of flour with it because the first time I made it, it was a little bit wet. I think it depends on the size of your eggs. That's why it's kind of a little weird making pasta. But this recipe for making pasta is the same as any other recipe I use. The only thing that's added to this recipe for making pasta is the fancy baking soda. So we get it all in a bowl, kind of give it a little bit of a mix up, toss our egg in, and then we mix and knead it for 10 minutes till it's nice and good and combined. I should mention too that when you're done kneading your dough and it's completely mixed, you want to put it in a plastic bag and let it sit for like an hour or so. You want to use it within like a day or two, but you just want to make sure that it has a good time to rest. And as usual, if it's too wet, add flour, and if it's dry and not sticking together, wet your hands with some water and it should come together. Just that little fine tuning. Anyway, here we go. Let's make this stuff. So I got my pot on the stove, gonna crank the heat up, and then I'm going to add my stock to my pot and let it heat up. Let it come to a boil. And because this is a new day, I was able to go to the store and get myself some ginger. And that's gonna really help with this process. So if there's any other seasonings you want to do to your stock, now is kind of your last chance to do it. So the trick to ginger is to use a spoon to peel off the skin. I'm just tossing that in here because I don't think I've ever had a video where I showed ginger before, and well, that's kind of what you do with ginger. And once you got the skin kind of peeled off of it, you can grate it right into your stock. I like quite a bit of ginger in it, but ginger can be quite strong. It can be very spicy, so you know, don't go crazy with it. And if you're in doubt, put some in, take a spoon, try it, see how strong it is. If you need a little bit more, then grate a little bit more into it. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually cook a piece of chicken, and I'm going to cook it in the broth. That way the flavor of the broth intertwines with the chicken, and you know, if I baked it and had it all covered in powdered spices, it would disperse inside the stock anyway. So I'm just gonna wait about 20 minutes or so. Gonna wait for it to boil, then let it cook a little bit longer and make sure that that chicken is all good and done before I take it out and shred it. Wasn't quite there on my thermometer, so I'm gonna go work on making my noodles. Time to get that going. I'm gonna be using this pasta maker. If you don't have a pasta maker, rolling pin and take your time. You can get there eventually. Not gonna do up all the pasta right now. I'm gonna do a quarter of it. I'm gonna do actually 2 quarters of it and then combine the quarters because it's easier to flatten out smaller amounts than trying to put the whole thing all in at once. And I found this technique worked pretty good because then I can layer them together and spread them out, and then it does kind of the full width of the pasta maker, and then I just keep running it through until I'm able to get it to the proper desired thickness. And what else is good about this pasta maker is that it has other attachments for spaghetti and I believe linguine. But the spaghetti setting works really good for making ramen noodles, so that's always fantastic. And we're almost there to the level of thickness that we desire. Now, something I should point out too is that when you run this through the second portion to make it into the ramen noodles themselves, you need to be really careful that you don't like squeeze it or anything, because the noodles can get all stuck together, and then you gotta run it through everything all over again to get it to kind of thin out. So make sure you run it through all the way and keep running it till it kind of drops out, and don't grab it, don't squeeze it or anything. You can add flour to your pasta to make sure it doesn't stick, but if you add too much flour to it and then throw it in your broth, that can kind of be a little bit gross, so you don't really want to do that. So just be nice and gentle and it'll be perfect. The other way you could do it would be to roll out part of the noodles and then take your knife and kind of score the back, and then have smaller noodles, but not all clumped up into anything. So our chicken should be about done now. I did just cut it in half with the knife because I wasn't really trusting the thermometer because it's cooking in boiling water or stock. But it all looks kind of cooked through, so I'm just going to shred it up with the knife and fork. Nice smaller pieces. And then it's time to get our soup on. And I just have a little bit of green onion there that I'm going to use as a bit of a garnish on the top. I think it really adds to the ramen to have the green onion. And as you can see, that small amount of noodles turned out to be quite a large amount of noodles. I was amazed of how much these things kind of blew up, and I was also amazed with the flavor and the texture. This was incredibly good ramen, and I think with a little bit of hot sauce it would be probably perfect. But I kind of designed this particular recipe to kind of suit the taste of anybody. You know, if you want a little bit more spicy, throw in a little bit of sriracha, maybe something even a little bit hotter, ghost pepper, and then you're all good to go. Noodles cook incredibly fast when they're fresh, and right here I'm just going to demonstrate just how stretchy these noodles are. It's kind of ridiculous. I'm going to call that the end of this video. So if you have any questions, concerns, or suggestions, leave them in the comments below. If you like my content, please like and subscribe. And until next time, stay awesome.